or turn them off so they do not interrupt the speakers in the midst of the meeting. Our lead staff is Brandon White. Committee assistant is Brett Gillespie. We appreciate the work of both of you. And Brett, at this time, if you would call the roll for us, please.
Senator Berg. Senator Neal. Senator Westerfield. Representative Brown. Representative Heverin. Here. Representative Kulkarni. Mr. Coleman. Mr. Davis. Ms. Drake. Dr. Jones. Chairman Givens. Co-Chair Timoney.
At this time, we do not have a quorum, so we will be having an informational-only meeting. We will not be approving the minutes. We will hold those for the next meeting at which we hope to do have a quorum. I do remind everyone in the audience and ourselves as well, we open every meeting by restating the purpose of our commission. The purpose of the commission shall be to conduct studies and research on issues where disparities may exist across the sectors of educational equity, child welfare, health, economic opportunity, juvenile justice, criminal justice, and any other sectors that are deemed relevant in an effort to identify areas of improvement in providing services and opportunities for minority communities. Certainly pleased to have a nice agenda today, and our first presentation is going to be on the topic of nail technicians, and honored to have Senator Reggie Thomas, my colleague and friend, here as the lead on this agenda item. Senator Thomas, if you will introduce yourself for the record and then assist those at the table with you in making sure the microphones are turned on and have them introduce themselves as well. And I am now turning it over to you, friend, for this section of the agenda.
Thank you, Chairman Givens. It's good to see you again, and a number of my colleagues, both in the Senate and in the representatives. Good to see everyone here. We're here today, Chairman Givens, on some very serious matters. What we've seen in the past several years is many nail salons face barriers and oppressive tactics from the regulatory body, the Board of Cosmetology. In many cases, these nail salons have been shut down or been heavily fined. In some cases, their licenses have been taken away. What you'll hear today is from 4 individuals who represent the nail salons, and all they're asking for is a change in legislation in which to provide them with a fairer and more inclusive role in the nail tech industry. We've drafted some legislation which we presented last month before the Licensing Occupations Committee, and that legislation is before you today. And the legislation includes several things like having the tests for nail technicians being given in multiple languages, remove any caps on retakes, reduce the money to retake the exam, have inspectors who know something about the nail technology industry, and have a seat at the table on the Board of Cosmetology. I'm going to let the members speak more to that. They're the reasons that I am here. And so I'm going to begin by having Ms. Molita South, who's the primary spokesperson for the nail tech industry, speak. She'll be followed by Ms. Leanna Wynn, then followed by Panya Soth, and then our final speaker today will be Mr. Michael Carter. So, Molita, I'm going to let you begin.
Good afternoon, Your Honorable Chair and the member of committees. My name is Molita South, a certified nail technician and representing an AAPI community today. We would like to present a crucial proposal for the nail industry. Firstly, we advocate for a fundamental change to the KBC board by adding a board member with nail technician background. This will help provide the board with an understanding of everyday challenges of the industry and better insight on how to properly regulate it. Secondly, we urge for the availability to take the written exam in multiple languages, including Cambodian, Vietnamese, and more. We need an interpreter and have an end to limit on past retake. In current regulation, after 3 failures of the theory exam, individuals must wait for 6 months and take an 80-hour brush-up course, following by a 3-year ban if the applicant fail another 2 more attempts. 3-year bans. What is the significance of these matters? The exam, which are administered digitally through PSI that have a capability to offer the test in many languages, are only offered in English in the state of Kentucky. A significant number of highly skilled individuals within our community are facing exclusion from their profession, primarily due to the fact they do not read or speak English well compared to native speakers. This does not make them deficient in their ability, sanitation, infection control, or skills. So when skillful nail techs have no choice but to leave the state entirely, drop out of their fields, become jobless, or rely on government assistance, the state will lose out those potential workers who are willing to work long hours and paying tax on their earning. We work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So by knocking down this barrier, we benefit everyone and keep Kentucky remain competitive with the neighbor state in this $10 billion industry. Furthermore, we must address a certain salon closure without prior warning. Many salon owners have faced immediate shutdown and excessive fine without warning notice. We ask the committee to think about what we have been through. In the current communication with the board are so weak. They have a longer delay in response. Each response takes months or never heard back at all. They limit the channel of the communication, which makes it even more difficult. Moreover, the fines payable are only through money order or cashier check. Many salon owners have to send the fine fee multiple times because the board said that they never receive it, and the salon owner have no record is it truly never received it. So in conclusion, we individually gather here respectfully request for equitable modification, such as by having no representation on the boards, exam in multiple language, unlimited test retake, and warning notice before any action against salon owners. Our objective is to provide a safe environment which proficiency in English does not determine the care we can provide to the public. Our diverse AAPI community are known for our strong work ethic, dedication, and belief in American dream. Our diversity enhance creativity and contribute to economic growth in Kentucky. We sincerely hope that this committee will support our bills and more for a brighter and inclusive more future for aspiring nail technicians in Kentucky. Thank you for your time, and I would like to pass the floor to Ms. Leanne.
Hi, my name is Leanna Nguyen. I'm a licensed nail educator and a nail school owner. At the last committee, we asked for transparency and due process for the Kentucky nail industry. So, since I cannot share with you the video that has over 100K views on TikTok, let's talk about the video. This video is about Q and his wife, Julianne, owners of Tippy Nail Lounge in Louisville, Kentucky. They have lost everything after this incident. This was an incident that could have been handled professionally. 2 inspectors walked into Tippy Nail Lounge, and the woman inspector reached over and touched the dog that was behind the counter, relaxing peacefully without permission. And the dog scratched her, and it barely broke skin. But they did not handle this professionally, and Q and his wife lost everything. I would like to discuss a few points. Tippy Nail Lounge had a good track record for 5 years. They literally just got out of the 2020 COVID crisis, like all the other people sitting behind you. If you watch this video, you can see that the floors are clean, things are organized, and the clients are peacefully relaxing in a safe environment until the male inspector, Jason Beck, showed his unprofessional aggression like a thug towards this tax-paying licensee. It's unacceptable for an official to threaten to shoot anything.
Ma'am.
I'm sorry.
If you would.
Okay, I'll calm down.
I'm gonna certainly permit you to continue. Just take a deep breath. We can hear you. Okay?
His action is definitely not in the Kentucky Code of Conduct. Yet the leaders of the board still allow this man to roam around and shut down more nail salons as we speak. As a community, this makes us believe that the board's agenda is to terrorize the Asian community in Kentucky. This is what happens when licensed agencies take out the human factor out of their decision making. At least back in the day, before 2016, the board actually had some due process. That is why we are asking for transparency. Publicly known due process, because a decision of one person can literally change the course of someone's livelihood. No one person should have absolute power to shut down a business. An inspector should have an education in nails before becoming an inspector. It's time to see that we are hurt all over the state of Kentucky. Laws and regulations are constantly changing, but we are never informed, not even a letter, yet we are expected to operate perfectly. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone, John 8:7. We hope everyone sees the magnitude of all these problems in our nail community. Let's make a change for a better Kentucky that other states can look up to. Thank you.
Now, let me remind our presenters that we are certainly appreciative of the message you're bringing and the desire that you have to have this platform in this moment. Let's make every effort to move forward in a logical, respectful sort of way. So let's please maintain decorum and continue with your presentation.
My name is Panya Sot, a Kentucky licensed nail tech. If ensuring sanitation and safety to the public is the main focus of Kentucky State Board, we must offer multiple language exam. Sanitation and safety are number one topic in the written portion of the exam. They are universal language. When a person understands it, they understand it. It doesn't matter what language they understand it in. Most of the workers in this industry are non-native English speakers. To test people in a language that they do not comprehend is forcing them to memorize only words, but not understanding the material. As an experienced nail tech, I can assure you that to be a good one, you don't have to be proficient in English. You just have to be skilled, which you can become through practices, and most important of all, you have to be able to provide safe and clean environment for your customer, and those are universally understandings. We also asking for no limit testing, because studies suggest that the more we test on a subject, the better we can learn. And in real life situation, there is no limit to the number of attempts a person can set out to achieve their goal. Lastly, I just want to point out that at 57.4%, Kentucky is number 44 out of 50 states in workforce participation rate. And here we are having a bunch of people motivated and seeking for jobs. I'm a true believer in the opportunity and support in this country. When I come here at 15 years old, I was able to access English as a second language program and was allowed to use dictionary to translate my exam. These kind of opportunity allow me to pursue higher education and earn a bachelor degree in electrical engineering. Imagine the people here today came here at various age, different age, 40, 50 years old. It's a fact that it's harder to learn a new language at this age. So they're not asking to make the exam any easier. They asking you to knock down barriers so they can go on and pursue proper licensing and go to work legally. We are here asking for work. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Carter. We're here today because the Kentucky Board of Cosmetology continues to display prejudice and unjust treatment towards the nail industry. We're asking for inclusion and fair treatment. The state board displays their actions. I'll lean forward, sorry. The state board displays their actions and conversations is nothing short of racism, referring to the people in this industry in a derogatory and demeaning ways. This is from the top down. It's apparent that the director approves of this behavior. Kentucky nail industry is primarily made up of Asian immigrants. They come here for an opportunity to obtain the American dream. And Kentucky Board of Cosmetology continues to put roadblocks in the way of this dream and crushes these individuals' future. The fair treatment that we ask for is we want somebody to be on the board from the nail tech industry. We have no voice. We're asking you to help us have a voice. The fair treatment with inspectors with a background that understand the nail technology, that can bring forth the information needed to help these individual salon owners and nail techs to become more aware of the processes that need to happen with the law changes and regulations that change. Our Department of Transportation has 18 languages that they offer for immigrants to come and take a driver's exam. And we trust when they pass that, they can leave there and drive a 3,000 or 4,000 pound vehicle and not kill somebody. However, the Kentucky Board of Cosmetology feels that if we can't speak English, we can't do a manicure. That's ridiculous. We have a legislature even commenting to the fact that tips are based on communication, so the exam should only be in English. That's the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard in my life. We go to a Mexican restaurant. There's a lot of Hispanics that don't speak very well, but they communicate. We give them a tip based on service. We get treated correctly. We get served what we want. We get pampered. We're paying money, and we're going to give a tip. It's not based on whether he can understand everything I'm saying or not. We need your support in this bill. We need a voice. We need a change in the administration of the Kentucky Board of Cosmetology across from the top down, because it has been shown that they really have no concern for this industry and these individuals. Thank you for your time.
Senator Thomas, you have anyone else wishing to testify at this time?
No, I don't. No, I don't, Senator Gibbons, but at the end of the meeting, I want to reserve some comments to close.
At the end of this portion of the meeting?
Yes.
Okay. We do have others that are here to testify, and so we will hold questions from committee members until both testimonies have happened. We appreciate your presentation. We're now pleased to have the Cosmetology Board staff here with us, Executive Director Julie Campbell and General Counsel Chris Hunt. If the two of you would come to the committee table, would certainly appreciate a brief presentation from you on the questions that have been raised. And then after your presentation, we will go to Q&A. Please do identify yourselves for the record and speak to the issues that have been raised.
Thank you to Senator Givens and committee members. We appreciate the opportunity to be here to respond to the legislation and the accusations therein. I'm Julie Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of the Kentucky Board of Cosmetology, and with me is our General Counsel, Chris Hunt. Let me state, to start off, I do have a presentation. It's not big. It's just got a little bit of information for you so that you can kind of see who we are and what we do. As a general rule. So we are the Kentucky Board of Cosmetology, and we are made up of 5 members. We are made up of 2 educators, one from the Technical Community College area, one from the private school industry, 2 salon owners, and a citizen member at large. Our board chair is currently a CPA and a citizen at large in Kentucky. Our licensing base is as of this morning's totals, we have 24,166 active individual licenses. 78% of those are cosmetology licenses, 16% nail techs, and 6% estheticians. I would like to mention that the scope of practice, I'm going to skip a slide here real quick and I'll come back to this one if that's okay. One of us needs to drive here and it clearly isn't me. Sorry about that. No, that's okay. Scope of practice for licensees is where I'm trying to get this slide to go. I'm so sorry. Individual licensed cosmetologists are trained in 3 areas. By definition and by training, they are able to perform hair, skin, and nail services. They are trained in everything from cuts and colors and styling to artificial nails. They have this same nail technician education the same education as a nail tech. They can also perform the same services as an esthetician, which is skincare and modalities for that. So a cosmetologist, for lack of a better term, is the surgeon world. If you put it in medical standards, a surgeon can perform surgery or general medicine, but a general practitioner may not be qualified to do surgery, if that makes sense. So it's kind of, it does encompass all 3 areas. So to go back to the previous slide, several accusations were made about salon licenses. This is a graph showing active salon licenses as of this morning. 6,417 salon licenses are active in Kentucky. In 2022 and 2023, we had 22 emergency closures or revocation notices posted, which is 0.34% of the entire salon licensing base. Out of those 22, 17 of them were based on consumer complaints that we arrived in those locations. 4 others were because we had multiple complaints in a large county. We had a large volume of complaints from consumers on all salon types in Daviess County, and I sent all of our inspection staff and our investigator to Daviess County, and they visited every salon in that county within a 3-day window. The only 2, I believe, that were not closed based on a complaint and or this countywide sweep were closed based on a regulatory inspection set in our licensing and compliance regulations and approved by ARRS, to the fact that the Board of Cosmetology has the authority and is supposed to visit every facility a minimum of 2 times per year. Doesn't always happen. I have 8 field staff when I'm at full capacity. All of my inspectors, with the exception of my investigator, Jason Back is an investigator. He has a police background and credentials, law enforcement credentials. The other inspectors in my staff are all licensed cosmetologists who have been licensed for no less than a decade apiece. The other conversation is about the reasons that we close a salon and the authority given to us by the General Assembly to do so. These are just 2, this is one section of our safety and infection control law and an example of prohibited items that are found in almost every nail salon that we enter and a reason that we cite individuals or close them down for safety. MMA is a nationally prohibited product in the nail industry. Yet when we arrive on site, we find it consistently in a nail salon. It causes kidney failure. It's meant for dental monomer, as a dental monomer, to be used with respirator coverage, and it is being used on nails, and this is the result of what can occur when it is used. It can cause infections, it can cause kidney failure, and dermatological reactions. Not to mention, it adheres so strongly to the nail bed that it will damage and can completely remove a natural nail because it is not breaking free as it should. The other reason for emergency order closures or revocation notices, first, let me be very clear, never have we revoked a license that does not have a long and torrid past with the agency where we have attempted fines and even suspensions that were not adhered to. The reasons we have entered and posted an emergency closure, the times that has happened, these items and occurrences have been present, and unlicensed individuals who pose a risk to the safety of the Commonwealth because of their lack of training. This is a picture from a 2019 case in Chattanooga, Tennessee, from an unsafe and unclean nail salon where an individual was exposed to flesh-eating bacteria because of improper safety protocols. There was a 2021 settlement in Tampa, Florida, and this was just a basic Google search, please understand, of $1.75 million because of an amputation due to an injury in a nail salon. We are very serious about our safety in the Commonwealth and in these salons, not just nail salons, all salons. The safety standards that we have set have been reviewed by CHFS Environmental Services, who of course regulate our health departments and where our food inspectors and things come from. But they were also consulted on by a national infection control specialist in the industry who is an RN and has more than 20 years in this industry working for major infection control product providers, as well as independent consulting and testimony in these cases. These are just a few pictures of the things that can happen when it is unsanitary or unlicensed practice can happen in a nail salon. And this is an individual that we received a complaint on just yesterday. This individual is using a multi-use product, which is specifically stated in our law that it must be put in a single-use item area to prevent cross-contamination. Additionally, this is an unlicensed individual. Now, if you look at this picture to the unseeing eye, it looks as though a nail tech is providing a nail service, which is great. But this individual is unlicensed. She has no nail license and no cosmetology license. She is not performing services in a safe and regulated way. We do have some pass and fail rates on our exam. Please keep in mind that these are 2018 to 2021 numbers. We have not yet gathered our data on the 2022, 21 to 22 year. We did change nail providers, test providers. To be clear, the exam that we give is a nationally created exam. It is given in English only. We are not the only board in Kentucky that gives only an English exam. And in fact, every board that I have asked specifically about their exam practices requires a proficiency in English exam if it is not a first language and an exam in English be taken. This is the pass-fail rate. PSI is our exam vendor at this time. The exam to provide that to a licensee costs the board $82 for that individual to walk in the door. So of the $85 being charged to that individual, the board gets $3 for time and all of the other details that go into making sure that they get on that scheduling list, to make sure that they are graduated and properly documented in their education, and all the other side of those items to get them to an exam.
Before you leave that slide, if you would.
Sure.
My eyes are not as good as they used to be. So I've got 18, 19, 19, 20, and 2021. What are the percentages of the pass rate on each one of those?
37, 42, and then to 46. So our exam pass rate is increasing each year.
37, 42, and 46. Thank you. Please
Yes.
continue.
Again, keep in mind, cosmetology providers also can and do provide nail services, and the pass rates on those are maintaining in the high 70% range. Our out-of-state nail exams that we are required just for verification that the individual is safe in their practice is slightly lower than the in-state training pass rates. It's at 38% in the same as a 2020-2021 year.
Expound just a moment.
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. When you say out-of-state exams,
These are individuals who have been educated in another state who are attempting to transfer their credentials to Kentucky for a license.
that's what out-of-state exam means.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
In cosmetology, they are also, if you notice, around 10% lower as a general rule for out-of-state training as opposed to in-state training for license transfer. And that's my last slide. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Hunt would like to speak on our the discussion about the Tippy Nail Lounge and the video that was not shown and that scenario.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Senator Givens. Make sure that I can be heard. There were a couple of things that I wanted to mention. I think it might be useful to, and this will be short and painless, I hope, in terms of how the procedure works. If one of our inspectors enters a salon and finds violations, they will draft an investigation report where they will detail their findings and the violations they found. They also document those with photographs. Sometimes we take video. That's a technical issue. We're trying to find a reliable body cam type video so we can have that more regularly, but we're not quite there yet. Turns out it's a little more difficult to make that work than it might seem on its face. But at any rate, we do document those with photographs and in a report. That investigation report is provided immediately to the licensee. That report clearly tells them in writing on the investigation report, by law, they have 10 days to submit a response. In practicality, the board only meets once a month, and prior to the board meeting, there's a committee that reviews all these investigations, any of those cases that have come up over the past month or more, and they make recommendations to the board. So in reality, these licensees have beyond 10 days to respond. In my just over 2 years with the board, not once have I ever told a licensee or their attorney, the board will not consider your response because it came in after 10 days. In many cases, the board has ruled they've never provided a response. They want to provide one late, and we will review what they have for us. It doesn't mean the board necessarily changes its opinion. So there were a lot of comments about due process and transparency, and I think it's important for the commission to understand how we operate. Once that time has passed and the board reviews it and makes some kind of decision, that licensee receives a letter and an agreed order that outlines their rights, and it outlines what the board's decision would be. In other words, the board found the following violations. It has assessed the following discipline of whatever that may be, and it can run the gamut as defined by statute. So it could be fines, suspensions, probation, all the way up to revocation. In that communication to the licensee, it is clearly explained to them that they can accept the agreed order and the ruling of the board. If they choose not to, they have 30 days by statute to request an administrative hearing under KRS Chapter 13B. All of that is explained to them, and they are, of course, given that 30-day time frame. At any point in that process, and frankly beyond, as the board's attorney, I can tell you, and I can give you plenty of specific examples if you would like them, of times when these deadlines have long passed, and I am more than happy to hear whatever they have to say or provide to us, or whatever their attorney may want to present to us. And there have been times when the board has taken that, even though it's come in late, and they've altered their decision. Of the 22 cases that Ms. Campbell mentioned that's over the past 2 years. So those are 22 cases where the board has entered an emergency order shutting down a salon or voted to revoke a salon. Of those 22, 12 of them are open today. That some sort of arrangement was reached, and they were allowed to maintain their license and continue to operate. In a number of those instances, some of them were emergency orders only. So in other words, the board entered an emergency order suspending the license and closing the salon, but did not vote to revoke that salon license. In most of those instances, those salons opened within days of the emergency order being entered. Sometimes if it took longer than that, it's because the licensee requested additional time to address whatever issues were cited by the board. They say, I need a week to get my salon straightened up and ready to go for an inspection. We conduct another inspection. If they pass that inspection, then they can open up. So that leaves 10 that have, since they were revoked, they have stayed closed. Of those 10, I don't have the specific numbers. I apologize. I'd go look if you want them. A handful of those, the salon was sold to somebody else. The license was transferred to another person. And I would say the majority of those 22 cases, we received no response to the initial notice of violations. In other words, the investigation report. When they had the 10 days to respond, and as I explained, really more than 10 days, it is very common that we never receive a response. There's never an explanation. And in all of those cases, of those 22 cases, except the couple that were emergency order only, so in all of the revocation cases, this was the third or fourth time that they had been cited. And in those previous ones, and when I say cited, I don't mean they failed to post the last inspection and so we're revoking you. I mean, every time our inspectors have gone in, they've been cited for having multiple unlicensed persons at the salon. And in the previous instances, they will have signed an agreed order where they admitted that there were unlicensed persons working, for example, or they were reusing single-use items on folks, or they were using prohibited items like Ms. Campbell explained. So at no point ever in my 2+ years on this board, or any case that I reviewed that happened before I came on board, has this board ever gone into a salon on the first violation and shut them down or revoke them. The only time that's ever come close to happening, and in each instance there were previous issues with that salon, however minor, were there. I can think of 2 times that our inspector walked into a salon and there wasn't a single licensed person in the business. And one couldn't be produced in any kind of reasonable time. But there were customers in chairs being provided services. And so on that basis, and I don't have any problem telling you, my recommendation in those instances was to shut them down until they could get some actively licensed, competent people working the salon. So with that being said, when it comes to Tippy Nail Lounge, I will tell you that the owner of Tippy Nail Lounge has requested an administrative hearing under KRS Chapter 13B. That is proceeding. And we just had a telephonic pre-hearing conference on that recently. The board has, when the board reviewed that case, our inspector had entered that salon. They asked the owner a question. They were looking for some particular items, or asking about where certain items were stored. The inspector was directed to a particular drawer at a station. When that inspector reached to open that drawer, one of the dogs that the owner had in that salon bit her and broke the skin. Didn't scratch her, did scratch her, but bit her. And at that point, our inspectors told the owner to collect their animals and get them away. That owner did not do that, is based on the testimony of the information provided by our inspectors and anything that I've seen. In fact, one of the videos that the owner of that salon posted on their social media account shows the inspector asking him to remove the animal and the owner ignoring him and continuing to work on a client while that dog walked around. Now, we can debate the details, and I'm sure they will be debated by me and somebody else down the road. But if you have dogs in a place open to business to the public, it is your responsibility to make sure that that animal doesn't harm somebody. Now, that dog happened to bite one of our inspectors, but what if it had bitten a member of the public? We had also asked the owner of Tippy Nail Lounge while this was going on, after the board reviewed everything, this was in the agreed order that was submitted, is to demonstrate that that dog was properly vaccinated. To this day, that owner of Tippy Nail Lounge has refused to provide that information. So we don't know whether that dog was vaccinated or not, and our inspector had to go through whatever medical protocols are involved to protect her based on the injuries that she suffered. That's just one example. In the agreed order, in the findings of the board for Tippy Nail Lounge, we identified no less than 14 separate statutory or regulatory violations. We also weren't able to fully complete the inspection because of the behavior of the owner of Tippy Nail Lounge and because our inspector was bitten by a dog and there were two still wandering around the salon at the time. We have also asked for the claim has been made that the owner has complete unedited video of the day of the inspection. That information has been refused to the board up to, as of today, the board, pursuant to its authority, issued an order to that owner to produce that video, and that order was ignored. Now, I've since had a conversation with his attorney. His attorney assures me that he's going to provide me that video. To date, I don't have it. So in terms of what actually happened, any video evidence of that, we're happy to look at it. We've asked for it. It hasn't been provided. I would just submit, I won't beat this horse anymore. I would just submit there were a number of violations in this salon beyond just the dog that bit one of our inspectors, and there was ample reason that for the board to believe that there was an immediate threat to the public, and under that authority, by statute, the board suspended their license by emergency order.
To be clear, we did not remove the dog from that premises. Louisville Metro Animal Control did, and the proceedings that they have continued to go through on the animal are not with this board. They are pursuant to Louisville's animal control laws and regulations.
And so I know we've gone through a number of things. I don't know if you want to if we want to go any further on Senator Thomas's proposed bill or not. I have additional thoughts on that. I don't know if you want to hear them now or if we want to save it for another time. But
I'd like to go ahead and hear them now if you can
Sure.
be concise.
Okay.
And let me, it's a great segue for me to shift the focus for just a moment. Two thoughts that I'd like to make clear. First of all, thank you for responding. Thanks for being here today. I want to clarify with the two of you that we have not had any conversation prior to this meeting. I'm glad you're here. I didn't know you were coming. The only conversation we had was just a moment ago when we stepped out in the hall and I explained about the testimony that you were about to hear and then the fact that you'd be invited to the table after that testimony. So I'd like to state that for the record for the purpose of impartiality about the proceedings here today. The second point I'd like to make briefly, and I'm confident some of my colleagues may have questions regarding the incident that is under discussion, but I would encourage my colleagues, when we do get to Q&A in just a few moments, those questions, I'm not going to restrict you from asking those questions. You're welcome to ask them, but understand that what has transpired is going to be adjudicated either in the judicial system or by the board and or both. We're not a court of law. We're not here to hear all the evidence. We certainly do wish to move forward in the places we can on this subject of trying to find the balance of safety and licensure. And so I'd love for us, to the degree we can focus our questions on this discussion about the proposed legislation, I'd really like to see us spend our time doing that. So now, share with us your thoughts and concerns regarding the legislation.
Thank you. Where I had started in my reviewing is we had received some materials that I guess had been submitted to the commission, and so I had made a couple of quick notes from those. I don't know if the members have that in front of them, but there were two Word documents.
It's the document titled KBC Roadmap to Failure.
Give us just a moment.
And there's a second document.
We got it. Okay.
That's labeled Issues Faced by the AAPI Community.
Yes, sir.
Good. Thank you.
And I was just hoping if you had them, you could follow along with me. It might speed things up.
We do have them in front of us, yes.
And Ms. Campbell will probably have to jump in to help me a little bit on this. I wanted to go over very quickly the testing process. There were some materials presented that were critical of how that worked. So I wanted to say if a student enters a school pursuing a nail tech license, so using the example that's provided in this document, that person's going half-time, so they're going to school 20 hours a week. I want to point out that's their choice. They can go up to 40. By law, they can get up to 40 hours of education in a week. So their education would take them to complete approximately 22 and a half weeks, assuming at part-time. And that's assuming they don't miss any days or anything like that happens. The statement is made in here that it would take approximately a month to schedule each exam. That's not true. When somebody graduates, a school by law has 10 days to report that graduation to the board. And then it can take the board anywhere from a couple of days to possibly up to a week to process that information and relay it to PSI, which is the company that does our testing for the theory and practical exams. Once that happens, the licensee receives an email. So the minute the board notifies PSI and PSI puts them in their database, they receive an email that makes them eligible, telling them that they're eligible to register for an exam. They theoretically, depending on the timing, could take that exam the next day, the theory exam. It would be possible for them to essentially take that exam theoretically one day after another. So they could take 3 exams in 3 days. As a practical matter, depending on the timing, usually they may need a 24-hour window before that's all processed in the system, and then they can register for an exam. So that person could, if they wanted to, take 3 exams inside of a week to 10 days. It is true, it is in law, that once if they have taken that exam 3 times and failed it 3 times, they are required to wait 6 months, during which time they are required to complete an 80-hour course, a refresh course or a brush-up course. It's called different things. And those time periods are not they're concurrent, they're not consecutive. So while that 6 months is running, you can get your 80 hours. You don't have to get the 80 hours and then wait 6 months. Once that happens, then they can test 2 more times under the same scenario I just explained to you. So theoretically, they could take those 2 exams inside of 2 to 4 days if they so chose. If that happens, then by law, they do have to wait 3 years. By law, their educational hours are good for 5 years from the date of enrollment. So if you calculate all that out, a nail tech, a prospective nail tech licensee could take our exam in a 5-year span 10 times, at which point they'd have to go back to school and complete the 450 hours, which they could complete if they went full-time in approximately 3 months, at which point the process would begin again. So there is no hard cap. There is no point where the board says to somebody, you may never, ever test for or receive a nail technician license from the state of Kentucky. It doesn't exist. It's never happened. Not because of testing. So the calculations that are in the document I would submit to you are not accurate.
There's a variety of reasons for the exam waiting period and for the expiration of hours after 5 years. As COVID showed us, the environment and the safety protocols can change immensely in 5 years. This exam that we provide via PSI is a national exam. It is legally defensible. It is weighted and psychometrically evaluated and created by subject matter experts across the cosmetology industry. It is written in a format to test safety and infection control specifically to ensure that the public is not being harmed with the processes being completed. It's given in 30-something states, and PSI is known to give dozens of professional licensing exams, not just cosmetology. They give a real estate exam, an appraiser's exam, I don't know that they give the CPA exam, but you understand what I mean. There's a variety of licensing types, and all of these exams are thoroughly vetted. Each question, by the time the vendor is done, costs approximately $10,000 to create that. By the time they have all the evaluations, the psychometrics, the subject matter expert travel and compliance, not to mention that those forms are rotated every 2 years approximately. So the reason for the 3-year wait is to give that individual the best opportunity to have new questions, maybe phrased differently, that would allow them to understand what it is. But this is a safety exam. It is not given in all languages. We can't access it in all languages. It is impossible for us to do so. They don't offer it. They offer it in several languages, but not every language. To be clear, the text that teaches cosmetology, the cosmetology industry, is got approximately a 99.5% market share by 2 companies of curriculum, Pivot Point and Milady, which is a Cengage product. Both of those texts come in 2 languages, English and Spanish. That is all. So the text curriculum is not provided from any of the national market holders in another language.
Please, if
Other
you
than
would,
that.
hold the
That
comments.
is, I'm sorry, that is according to those 2.
Pause just a moment
Sure.
for me. Please do not speak out loud. Thank you for not doing that. Thank you in advance for not doing that. We certainly will have some Q&A in a moment. If there are concerns that need to be addressed, one of my colleagues or I will ask those questions. If you would wrap up in the next little
Sure.
bit, we'll go to Q&A. Go ahead.
Yes, so that information was taken from those 2 companies' websites. I apologize.
Very good. All right, we're going to go to questions if we could. Senator Westerfield, I have you first, and Senator Berg, you're on deck.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple, if that's all right.
Please.
And I'll try to move through them quickly. I appreciate you finally getting to the proposed legislation. I'm not here to litigate. I agree completely with the chairman. Arguing and the back and forth about what happened at the one salon, I'm sure you all are very concerned about that. That's not for this forum at all. So I'm not going to get into that, and that's not what I care about at this particular moment. I don't see anything objectionable to the 5 recommendations that they're asking for. And by Ms. Campbell, hold on a second. Hold on. And Ms. Campbell, you mentioned that it is. You just said that it was available in multiple languages. It seems, and I don't know what languages they make it available in, but it seems that seems like a reasonable request. And really, what you just mentioned, the very last thing that you said, goes back to what Ms. Soth said, who was sitting next to Senator Thomas. it doesn't matter whether or not they understand it in this language. It's that they understand it at all. And if that needs to be in a native language, that seems to be a reasonable request. Is that something the board would be willing to consider?
So I understand what you're saying.
Then you should be able to answer with a
However.
simple yes or a no.
However, EPA-regulated disinfectants that are used in salon environments and necessary for safety and infection control do not have labels in every language out there. They also...
That's fair, but the exam,
Correct.
is that not something the board would be willing to offer in a different language?
If it was accessible through our exam vendor, potentially yes.
Thank you.
I can't speak for what they would or would not do. Sorry.
And I wouldn't ask you to do that. And presumably there are other vendors, but
There's
as you
two.
mentioned that they do offer it in multiple languages. You all didn't speak to the cost. I didn't hear, and in
Yes,
their
sir.
recommendations,
I did speak to the cost.
you did. But with regard to their recommendations here, they talked about. They don't mention that. You all mentioned the $85, and that 82 of that covers the cost of the exam, and 3 of that comes to the board.
Yes.
Their 5 recommendations don't have anything to do with that. They don't mention that.
Yes, they mention a $35 cap on retake exams.
They don't
Every
in the
exam.
5 recommendations on their legislative actions. There is no dollar figure amount anywhere. They mention the caps on retakes, but I assumed, and I read that to mean the
Yes.
number of times you can take the test, which you've said doesn't have a limit.
There,
So-
it is in there. I'm sorry, sir.
I don't see any issue on that. Are the complaints offered in multiple languages? Mr. Hunt, you mentioned it's Mr. Hunt, right?
That's correct.
You mentioned that when your investigators are on site, that they will do a complaint or an investigative report. The nomenclature I might be butchering there. And then they have 10 days, though you've talked about how it's effectively longer than 10 days to respond. Is that offered in a different language?
No.
Okay. The part that,
I'm sorry, Senator Westerfield.
yes, ma'am.
On section 5 on page 3 of the draft legislation, letter E,
And
line
I'm-
7.
And I didn't look at that.
The fee for retesting shall be capped at $35 per examination
Gotcha.
per applicant.
Fair point. Thank you. I didn't notice that in the language. I was looking at just their broad recommendations. So I appreciate you finding that. And if the costs are what they are, then they are what they are. A question about the out-of-state exam, and I saw the date up there. Is there a different exam for someone that's coming from out of? Okay.
No, sir. It's the exact same exam.
Okay. So the number of hours is what matters in terms of their education prior to the exam. The curriculum doesn't matter. It's just the hours. Is that?
The curriculum transcripts are evaluated for matching standards to the curriculum put in regulation by the board here.
Okay.
Yes.
And how many members are on the board?
5.
And are any of them, I understand that the vast majority of your folks are cosmetology and not just nail
So
technicians.
4 out of the 5 are cosmetology licenses, so therefore duly trained in nail technology, and 2 of them are instructors as well.
In nail technology or in cosmetology?
Cosmetology,
generally?
which trains all 3.
Okay. Do you all have racial data on your pass fails?
Absolutely not. We do not ask any racial profiling on exams, applications. On any application ever in the board has there been a question of race or standards of that type.
Is there any data nationally on the race of makeup of your cosmetology versus your different levels of licensure? Nail technician.
Not
versus-
that I'm aware of, but I'm happy to go back and look for that for you.
And the case that was received yesterday,
Yes,
that was
sir.
in your presentation, was that a photo of her?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I am insulted and offended that you'd use a photograph of someone that is subject of a complaint in this forum in that way. Now, I was upset when I took the note down, and I'm stunned you would use it. Stunned that you would use it. That showing the complaint and you redacted that, but then you had the picture of the person that was in the complaint. I think that's grossly inappropriate. Grossly inappropriate. And the board has no business doing that. I'm not sure what rules you're operating under, but this is not the appropriate venue for that. And so to hear you, I think, and I appreciate the the intent with which you, or the spirit with which I think you answered the question. You don't want to make decisions based on race, and you don't want to look at or ask those questions or fear any sort of bias in that regard, and yet you were happy to broadcast a photo of any complaint. It's not about race in that particular regard, but for there to be such regard in one place and no regard in another is very troubling to me. I had some other questions. You all have addressed some of that. I'd be curious to know what the failure rate is compared to other states. It's troubling to see on the full cosmetology exam, your pass rates are really, really strong. And you understand why I'm asking about the racial question there. My gut, I could be wrong. I'm just a white guy making an assumption. But my gut tells me that most of your cosmetology folks are not Asian American Pacific Islander. And most of your nail folks are AAPI. And to see such distinct, and I'm not blaming the commission, but I think it's worthy of examining for such failure rate or pass rates to be so much substantially lower on that nail exam. And again, if it's a national exam, you're not making the exam.
Correct.
I think the language barrier could probably be a part of that. That's all I've got right now, and that was sort of a stream of consciousness. But I seem to think, and again, I appreciate you clarifying on the fee and clarifying on the fact that there's no limit on retakes. I'll close my remarks in saying I think the 3-year ban is silly. I think we should wheel out. And I appreciate, Chairman. I think we ought to let people work. And it's not just unique to this particular industry, and not just unique to Asian American Pacific Islander Americans. It's everybody. They should be free to try to work. And if you can't pass the test, can't pass the test. I think the language barrier is a problem there, and we can address that. I think that's a reasonable request, a pretty low bar, frankly. I appreciate the explanation on the due process concerns there. I'm troubled, and I didn't get a chance to ask the panel why they thought they needed to use legal interventions to prompt board response. That was one of the things they said. I'd like to hear some explanation of that from them or from you all, but that's all I have this time, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Berg, before I go to you, you'll be next. I've got a question myself of clarification.
Sure.
So before we run into a 3-year period of exclusion, or whatever you might want to call that, how many times will a person have failed the test?
5.
5 failures before
Correct.
the 3-year exclusion. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Senator Berg, you're next, and then Representative Kulkarni, I have you on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do have a couple of questions, if that's okay. And you don't have to give me all the answers now, because some of these I don't expect you're going to have the answers to. This first one, I think you will. Of the 22 facilities that were closed, I think over the last 2 years,
Yes, sir.
how many of those were nail specific? I mean, how many hair salons versus how many nail salons are you versus, estheticians?
I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure the majority of them are nail salons.
So the majority of what
Yes.
you're actually closing emergently are nail salons.
In
But could I please have a number of what percentage of the businesses that you're closing down are actually nail salons? You don't have to give it to me now.
And if I can, just by way of explanation, we have a couple of different business license types. So, for example, some businesses may start out as a salon licensed only to perform nail services, but they may want to add waxing services. That puts them into a different type of license category. So that's the main reason why I can't give you that answer without.
Percent by category will work for me. Thank you, sir. It's only 22. It shouldn't be that hard.
I'm sure I can handle it.
All right. Of the 14 claims against Tippy Nails, could you tell us what the most egregious violation was, in your opinion? I know we're not, I'm just curious.
If I may, I believe that was the scope of practice and unlicensed practice being performed in there.
If you'll give me just a second,
But
I'll call
it would
up
probably
this.
be better to to answer that.
I had it open, but I thought we had moved off of that, so.
don't need an answer immediately. I mean, you can give
I
it to me
can
later.
give you one right now if you want it. There was an unlicensed person providing services. They were providing unlicensed services. They had an eyelash artistry set up there, and they were providing those services. They weren't licensed to do so.
All right, that's good. So those are the most egregious there. They were doing eyelashes, they weren't, and there was somebody actually working on a customer who was unlicensed.
And well, there,
Okay.
there are
I just
others,
wanted to
but-
get an idea of what we were talking about. Okay, another question, and then I'll follow it up by just my last one. Do you know what percentage of your cosmetologists versus what percentage of your nail technicians in the state of Kentucky, have English as a first language? I don't expect an answer now, but I would like an answer if you can provide it.
I don't have any idea how to provide that information, ma'am. I'm so sorry.
We simply don't ask.
We
the question.
simply don't ask. We don't ask
All right.
any of that.
My last
I
question,
apologize.
and bear with me on this, because I too am controlled by a board. For me, it's the Board of Medicine. First of all, I would like to make a statement that, thank God, that there is not this animosity between the board and the people it represents in my world, because that would be a real problem. And the animosity shows, and it shows on both sides. So clearly there's a problem, because the board's job is to make sure that people are doing their jobs. And when there's this much animosity, something's not going right. But my real question has to do with the pass rates. Pass rates of 37, 42, 46% after 450 hours of accredited schooling. I would see that as an issue that needs to be addressed on the education side. Is the board not responsibility, that has no responsibility for the quality of the education that's being given?
So absolutely, and we do set curriculum standards. We require reporting, and they are not accredited per a national standard as of yet. We have only been able to recently place that as a requirement within schools are not required at this time to be
Schools
accredited.
are not accredited.
Correct. We've only recently been able to put that into regulation, that we require them to accredit within a set time frame, whether they be new or existing, so that we can ensure that the Commonwealth students are receiving a proper education.
All right, so your schools are not accredited.
They're
so
only
as a
licensed.
board, you have no responsibility to oversee the quality of the education that these people are paying their money for?
We do, and we do
How?
the best we can. We check records, we do audits, we verify hours. It's a prolific problem across the country that hours are reported that are not necessarily being gotten, and that is in all cosmetology professions. We do the best we can to visit those schools and check all of that data. And
Last
require
question,
the
last
proper
question.
reporting.
What has the board done to address what I would consider to be unacceptably low pass rates? I mean, if you have less than half of your applicants continually not passing a national exam that they have just been prepared for, some things, there's a between and betwixt there. I mean, you can't assume that they don't know what they're doing. They just finished this education. So what have you as a board been doing to address what is clearly a problem in this state?
We lobbied for and got a requirement that those schools become accredited, which wasn't in place when either one of us started.
So the problem is the schools are inadequate?
So, if I may, if they're accredited, it's an extra layer, we hope, of protection or some assurance that they are educating their students properly. I will also point out to you that given the board staff, it is impossible for us. The only way we could absolutely ensure is if we had somebody sitting in a classroom at every one of these schools every single day. The education doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens over a long period of time, and we simply do not have the resources. That's the only way, to be perfectly frank, that we could do this, and we just don't have that. And so we do the best we can with accreditation and the other sorts of requirements that we have in trying to make sure that they have the required number of hours and so forth. We try to verify when a school opens, and along the way that they're at least documenting that they are teaching to the particular curriculum that they're required to. And frankly, we have the exams. And so this is just a personal comment. I'm not a member of the board. I don't speak formally for the board. I would just submit that if we took a school that had what I presume you would consider to be an unacceptable pass rate, and we closed that school down, we'd probably be sitting here in this committee or another committee hearing from folks that run those schools.
I'm not suggesting closing that school down. I'm suggesting making sure that that school knows that they don't have an adequate pass rate from their participants, and that something has to be done to address that curriculum so that these people can be taught what they need to know to pass an exam. I mean, if my School of Medicine had a 50% board, less than 50% board pass rate, I mean, something is wrong with the school. That's unacceptable. And
Personally,
or something's wrong
disagree.
with the exam.
Personally, I wouldn't disagree with you. But the board is limited by the authority that it's been given, and so I think that it only goes to a certain point. We would certainly be happy to hear any suggestions that you or any other member of the General Assembly might have on
Senator
how
Berg,
to,
any other?
I think one suggestion may be to see if they could take the exam in the languages that they speak. That might address your pass rate, your pass-fail rate.
Okay, I have two others that have signed up for questions, and then Senator Thomas, we're going to bring you back up to wrap up. We do have another agenda item, and I'd like to spend maybe 8 more minutes on this one if we could. Representative Kulkarni, and then to be followed by Senator Neal.
Thank you, Chairman. I will try to keep my points brief. I want to welcome everybody here today. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you. My questions are going to be directed to you, as they have been by my colleagues. I'm interested specifically in the practicalities of moving forward with this proposed legislation. So I want to start off by asking, I agree with Senator Westerfield, who mentioned that the 5 requests sound pretty reasonable, and you responded with the cap on the cost for testing. So I would like to first ask you, what is the cost for getting a license per applicant, and what is the breakdown of that?
It's $50 per applicant per year.
That goes to the board?
Yes.
And how much of that goes to the testing company?
None of the licensing fee goes to the testing company.
So
the
it's
testing
50
fee is separate.
Testing fee separate. So it's 50
Correct.
to the board, and how much for the test?
$85 per exam.
And that goes directly to the testing
Correct.
company. Okay. So, and they have to pay this every time
Yes.
they take the exam, which
Every
they can,
time a person sits in a seat for that exam, it is a fee.
Okay. And they can take that up to 5 times, fail it up to 5 times before this 3-year
Correct.
ban, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But other than that, they could, I guess they're only limited by that.
Correct.
Okay. So my next question, and just by way of context, I'm an immigration attorney and I specialize in employment-based immigration. So this idea of credentialing is something I deal with every single day for both high-skilled and low-skilled workers who are trying to immigrate to Kentucky and to our country. As a legislator, I have had the privilege of sitting in many, many rooms in many different states with legislators, with workforce agencies, all of whom are trying to figure out how we can put people to work that want to work. This question of licensure, this question of credentialing is foremost in everybody's minds. And so one of the things I wanted to ask this board specifically is, given that context, there's a lot of different states and agencies and boards individually, if they can, or on a state level, who are looking at ways to evaluate individuals outside of traditional means. So, for instance, you mentioned there are only 2 companies, right, that provide tests.
Well, there are more, but the market share is exponential in those two.
But there
two
are
companies.
more.
I know of two other curriculums that are, one I have not seen an update on in a decade or more, and one that is used exclusively in a corporate school. The exam, the national exam, is of course referenced in the two major text holders, which are Pivot Point and Milady.
Is there any restriction with these testing companies, any of them, that exist? So there's 4 total, is what I understand you saying.
There's 4 total texts that I'm aware of, major curriculum.
Is there any
really
restriction for this board specifically, or for Kentucky, to find a way to translate the materials in different languages?
We do not have the resources to even to get a translator for a hearing to assist, which we do, was one individual from Seattle.
Well, this is just test materials.
Yes,
I just
the
mean
test
one time.
materials come through a national vendor. There are 2 national vendors out there, and they do have a variety of languages, but they do not have every language.
Understood. But,
Yeah,
and we
so-
don't.
And that's the board used to create the exam, and the pass-fail rates were far worse than they are now, and they were very subjective exams. So the national exam was a better option for across-the-board safe
But the board has the authority
consistency.
to administer the exam or change it as it sees fit, correct? There's no restriction.
No.
Okay, thank you. My last question, and again, getting back to practicalities, have you been approached before today or in the past about this specific question of providing the exam in multiple different languages?
We received a letter from Mr. Carter as well as various ones in the past year, but from Mr. Carter we got a letter in 2020. Other than that, I would have to go back through board records and see, but all of those are provided straight to the board.
So this is recent to you?
Correct.
This issue. I understand that it's very contentious.
Yes.
Everything has been very contentious here today. This is an issue to me that is not contentious. It should be approached in a very rational, practical manner. There are individuals, again, that need to be licensed. How do we get them licensed in a safe, right, and efficient manner? What of the proposed legislation, which provisions would you be opposed to moving forward, and are you willing to come to the table with the individuals who are interested parties to reach some sort of compromise or agreement moving forward?
The several items in there are, of a practical matter, not feasible or possible. During the exam, no matter who takes that exam for any nationally recognized and provided exam, questions are not allowed to be asked. It is a set script that the examiners give and or is accessed. The standard response through training is please do the best you can with what you've brought or what you know, because it removes the defensibility. If we are trying to teach part of during the exam, you're not truly getting a read on the skills during that. So questions during it, interpretation services, we aren't equipped, nor are we financially able to offer all of that. We certainly, I think, are open. Again, I don't speak for the board specifically. That it is completely, I have no vote whatsoever, please understand. But this has been brought to them here in, of course, certainly recent months, as of August 22nd when this draft became available to us at all. So we've only had it less than a month, and the board came off a summer break and met just one time since then. So they realistically have not had an extreme amount of time to even look at this legislation or consider anything.
My question was, would you be willing to sit down at a table and discuss it?
I would say that the board would be open to that. I don't make that decision, of course, because I run the day-to-day operations based on what they tell me to do. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So Senator Neal for the last question before Senator Thomas comes back.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the last series of questions touched on what I was concerned about. And and also the responses helped me a little bit. But I just for clarification, I noticed in the current statute, it says there will be 5 members appointed by the governor as follows. 4 of the members shall have been cosmetologists 5 years prior to their appointment and shall reside in Kentucky. Then it has 2 whom shall be cosmetology saloon owners, 1 whom shall be cosmetology teacher in public education, and 1, all of them are pretty much related to cosmetology except one at large, correct?
Correct, because cosmetologists receive training in all 3 industries as a matter of their licensing.
Right, except in this instance, it's clearly a lack of communication or a lack of something that creates division between those who want to work and your responsibility in making sure it's safe and meets certain standards. So it just leads me to one thing. Do you find something inherently difficult about including an additional member, a licensed nail technician?
Other than the fact that it would make it impossible. You know, an even number board makes it very difficult to conduct business if there's any disagreement.
Two members shall be licensed nail technicians. What I'm getting at, look, I don't want to embarrass you. I'm not trying to put you. I'm just raising a question. It just seems to me that this is not a difficult thing to understand from the standpoint that there's a gap in understanding and expectations, and the communication seems to be blocked by certain inhibitors with respect to this. And it seems to me that bringing people together and the board as well, responding to the needs of those who come to work in the industry is extremely important in getting good outcomes all around. And I'm sure there's no magic bullet, but I think you have to come together to resolve this type of issue. I think it's pretty clear. So I'll just raise the question. It just seems to me, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to cut it because I'm I think the questions have been asked are very good. It might be helpful if the board considered having someone at that table that could help bridge that gap in understanding other problems that you can't even bring here and you may not even know. So I just want to say that. I'll end it there, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Very appropriate place to end as Senator Thomas comes back up, because I believe Senator Thomas will likely be the person that's at the table that helps bridge this conversation. If the two of you, any very brief closing thoughts? I sense you have something that you'd like to say very briefly.
I would, please.
Please.
This is the only thing I would want to say. Concerning this bill, I would have a number of other comments that I would make. I understand that we're short on time, but I would also say, before this bill got drafted and before it got presented to this commission or anywhere else, it was never presented to us. It was never presented to the board. We had no idea it was coming. We didn't know it was going to be presented at the Licensing and Occupations Committee. Somehow or another, I suspect, getting how this started with this testimony, the impression has been given to you all that this is that we're at blows, and we're not. We're simply trying to respond to what's been presented. Some of these comments were borderline defamatory, if you sensed an edge in my response. But I would just want to say, we never said we didn't want to discuss this. And it's exactly the opposite. There may be things in here that the board would agree to. The board just hasn't had a chance to review any of this. So I just didn't want you all to think that we were here saying not only no, but heck no, or something like that to any of this. That is not what this is. We're simply here trying to respond to what's being presented. Some of it is clearly wrong, and some of it is, I guess, open for debate.
Thank you, and duly noted. Senator Thomas, do you require someone else to come to the table with you, or can you wrap this up for us yourself?
Again, Senator Gibbons, maybe it's the Chairman Gibbons, maybe it's the lawyer in me, but we would like some time for rebuttal. We never got a chance to have any questions asked, so I would like about 8 minutes of rebuttal.
I don't have 8, but we will extend 6, and so 6 is the best we can do. Thank you both from the board for being here.
I'll start off with you.
Senator Thomas, your group has 6 minutes.
So, I'm a licensed educator for nails, and I specify only in nails. PSI is used in Minnesota, and I talked to an educator in Minnesota, and they only pay $25 for any type of language, like the common, like Vietnamese, Khmer, the type of language where people who do nails speak that language, or Spanish, right? So they can definitely do that.
So clarify if you would. That's $25 on top of the $85.
No, it wasn't $85 in Minnesota. It's $25 for the PSI test in Minnesota. And also, they can take it unlimited, and it's PSI, the same software. And also, if they need that much help, PSI can actually bring in an interpreter in the computer room where they all sit alone and do the test, okay? The reason why we have so many that they keep saying that we have unlicensed, because we have people with 14, 15 years from different states trying to transfer, but this board makes it so difficult for them to transfer, okay? With Q, he had a girl hanging out in the shop, and she was actually a licensed nail tech from Indiana, and that's pretty comparable to this state. And when she says the word, "I don't make that decision," that sounds really familiar, because we have another audio recording that she says, "I don't make that decision," okay? When they shut down a rural school in Kentucky. So I'm gonna pass the mic.
We can ignore a lot of things. We can dress up prejudice. We can dress up racism. But when we have a state inspector with the director of the cosmetology board was asked a question by a school, "You're not going to shut us down, are you?" And the director says, "I have nothing to do with that. I'm just gathering information." And as they exit the building and the door is closed, the inspector has a body cam on, recording himself, and he tells the director, the correct answer should have been, "Yes, we're shutting you down because you all are a bunch of fucktards." That is something I cannot live with. I cannot believe that this lady is still in the office.
So Senator Thomas, you want to wrap us up here?
One more thing. One of this board member actually had a dog.
No, ma'am. Thank you.
In his shop.
Thank you. Senator Thomas, if you'll ask the two of them to step away, and you can conclude the testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Givens and members of the committee. Just let me hit a few highlights briefly. First, I want to go back to Senator Berg and Representative Kulkarni's comments about the fact that there's a problem here that really needs to be addressed. I would encourage both of you, before you end the day to go on Facebook and look at the Facebook comments for the Board of Cosmetology. On a scale of 5, see what that rating is. You will see that as of today, that rating for the Board of Cosmetology in terms of how it deals with people currently is 1.9. Okay, not even 2. It's 1.9. Look on that today. You can just Google that. Another point that I do want to emphasize is that there's some administrative problems here that are not in law. It is correct when you hear from the Board of Cosmetology say that you could actually take the exam the next day once you graduate. But the reality is that you have to get a certificate that says you graduated and now you're ready to proceed. That's an administrative measure. And there are people out here, many who will tell you, because I've heard this, that sometimes it takes 3, 4, 6 months before you get the certificate so you can begin to take the exam. Okay, so there's an administrative delay in getting the information that's needed to even begin taking the exam. You can't really take it the next day because you don't have that certificate from the board saying you've graduated from your classes. To Senator Neal's point, and Senator Neal understands this very well, it's very important to have a seat at the table if you're going to make a difference. Okay, you've got to be able to be present and be in a policy-making position where you can hear all the problems and address all the answers before you can have a voice. And these people asking for is a voice. So, Senator Neal, your point is well taken that right now these people are silenced. I've been debating about this, but I want to say this and indulge me, Chairman Givens, because you and I have talked about this 3 years ago. The record will reflect that when this vote came up for the establishment of this committee back in 2021, following the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, I voted against forming this commission. And I sit on the Senate floor, and Senator Givens, you've can go back and look at the tape. I know you've done that before. That I felt this board was a waste of time because throughout my 70 years of life, I've seen many cities and communities form these commissions on race that try to do good and end up doing nothing, and I was no longer going to have any part of that. So I voted against this. This committee now is in its third year. This is its third year of existence. And to date, this committee has yet to pass any legislation that's gone through this legislature. I submit that this legislation I've brought today is in this committee's wheelhouse, as consistent with the mission you read at the Senator Givens at the beginning of this committee meeting. Something needs to be done. You've heard testimony, and justice demands that we make some steps to correcting the situation. Now, we know our legislation. I may not get everything that needs to be done. I understand that. But change has to begin somewhere. So I'm hoping that this is the legislation that will finally be a breakthrough for this commission, and that you prove me wrong. That this committee does have meaning in the state of Kentucky in 2023 and beyond. And with that, Senator Givens and Chair and committee members, I'll close.
Senator Thomas, I always appreciate our dialogues, and I will reflect back to you something I think you know, but I'm going to state for the record that the gathering here today is not a committee that has authority to pass legislation. This is a commission not charged with any legislative authority for the purpose of passing legislation. So I want to make certain we correct and clear up that on the record. The second point I'll make briefly to you, and you are the perfect person because you've brought this issue before us today. You sense, and many in this room have spoken to it, there is a real need to restart this dialogue and this relationship between this board and this community. I think you're the perfect person poised to do that because you've brought this issue to us. And so, respectfully, friend, I would charge that you roll up your sleeves, as I know you're able to do, go to work on trying to bring these folks together in a room and work through the things that can be worked through. We have a legislative process. You're skilled at using it, as are others. Let's bring this up in legislation, find some compromise and or some point at which we can move forward on striking the balance between the safety that has to be there and the opportunity for these talented small business individuals to bring their talents so that they can benefit their families and their community. But please, I ask for your leadership on this, and I look forward to it. Thank you for the presentation, and I'm ready to move on to the next agenda item. Our next agenda item, and I appreciate the patience of the presenter on this one, the associated health risk of ethnic hair care products. Dr. Powell, if you would come on up to the committee table, please. And if you'd like to pause just a moment, take your time, gather your thoughts. We're going to give folks some time to move out of the room, as it appears that you didn't bring as many people with you as the first agenda item did bring.
No.
Dr. Powell, if you are ready, we will begin the presentation and appreciate your presence here. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Hello, my name is Dr. Alita M. Poe. I am an associate professor in the Department of Chemistry at the University of Louisville. So first I want to thank Co-Chairman Givens and Co-Chairman Timoney for allowing me to present to the Commission today. Okay, so my presentation today, my talk is entitled Associated Health Risks of Ethnic Hair Care Products. So let me give you a brief outline of my talk. So I'm going to give a little background on hair, its structure, its formations, some terminology, the reasons why African American women straighten or relax their hair, and I may say African American and Black interchangeably. I'll talk some about hair relaxers, the harmful chemicals, and some other products, hair products, and the harmful chemicals in those. I'll lastly talk about the desires of Black women versus the reality, especially in terms of their hair care journeys. So first, let me give you a little bit of information about just a hair follicle. So on this slide, there is a image of a hair follicle, and I just want to bring a couple of points to your attention. This is the part of the follicle where the hair grows out. There's also this sebaceous gland, and this is the gland that actually produces the natural oils in your hair that nourish the hair shaft and also nourish the scalp. So one thing about hair follicles is that the shape of the hair follicle and its angle under the scalp determines what type of hair comes out of your head. Your hair follicle can be shaped as a circle. It can be shaped sort of flat. And then also it can have this shape and then be angled in such a way under your scalp that the hair grows out of your hair in curls or corkscrews. So those are just genetic differences in the way the hair follicle is. So there are different types of hair, as we know, but these different types of hair are actually called formations. And so what a hair formation is just the shape that your hair is as it comes out of your scalp. And so they've characterized a whole host, about 10 different formations of all of the hair on the human head. And these hair formations, these lines here represent one particular hair shaft as it's growing out of that hair follicle that you saw earlier. As you can see that the formations go from straight hair to sort of curly and then sort of coily, kind of kinky. And these associated hair shafts have pictures of types of hair where you can see on a whole head based upon the hair formation that's growing out of this head. So I want to just bring to your attention on the upper right side of this slide, this S represents one hair shaft, a curly hair shaft. And so if you can see the S's here and the lines between them, these represent particular types of attachments of the hair. We call them bonds. So the sulfur represents the element sulfur. The S, represents the element sulfur, and then the lines attached to each one of the S's represent bonds between those two atoms. And so these bonds then are called disulfide bonds. And those bonds are the strongest bonds in your hair. They are the disulfide bonds that are attached to other parts of the hair shaft are what make the hair curly. So generally, kind of straight hair has very few disulfide bonds, but the curlier your hair is, the more disulfide bonds it has. And these disulfide bonds can be attached between the curls inside the hair shaft, But also, once the hair starts getting curlier, there are more disulfide bonds, as I said earlier. But then there can be disulfide bonds that are attached horizontally to another hair shaft. So the curlier your hair is, it's almost as if that hair can kind of start growing in groups. So also notice that the curlier the hair is, notice that kind of the bigger it gets, the more space those individual hair shafts take up, the more space they take up. And it results in kind of larger hair and gravity-defined styles that black women and men, but black women can style their hair in. So that's kind of like the background that I wanted to just tell you about hair formations. Now here's just a little bit more information. You can see once again the different hair formations, and then see how those individual hair formations are associated with the style of a whole head of hair. Here in this line we see straight hair, not many disulfide bonds, very few or none at all, hence the hair is straight. But then the more disulfide bonds that the hair has, then you can see how the associated hairstyles get larger, get larger. Okay, so now I just want to talk about a little bit of terminology to make sure that everybody is on the same page in terms of understanding. So when we say natural hair, we are referring to hair that does not have or has not been chemically processed at all. And it is just the regular natural pattern that grows out of your head. When we say relaxed hair, then relaxed hair is curly or natural hair that has been chemically processed. And it has been chemically processed to remove the disulfide bonds, to actually break those bonds so that the curl pattern does not have any, the curl pattern is not there anymore. And the outcome is then straight hair that doesn't have curls or kinks. One thing I want, so permed hair then, this is generally what people who have straight hair will do. They will have the straight hair, and this is hair that has been straight hair that has been chemically processed to add disulfide bonds. So then the outcome is this straight hair that at the end kind of gets curls and kinks.
Good. Ladies, we're glad to have you here. Please be as quiet as possible. Thank you. Please proceed. Thank you.
So one thing that I want to say about the difference in the relaxed hair is that the chemicals that are used to relax the hair are harsher and they break the disulfide bonds in different places. And once they break the disulfide bond, it can never be reformed. So that hair stays straight. The chemicals that are used to perm, to change straight hair to curly hair, they also break the disulfide bonds, but they break them in a certain place so that the bonds can still be reformed. And so those chemicals that are used to kind of break the disulfide bonds and allow them to be reformed are not as harsh on the hair as the chemicals that actually just break the disulfide bond altogether and actually removes an actual sulfur atom. Anyway, so just a little bit of kind of what is beauty. So I think this slide sort of epitomizes why black women kind of relax their hair. Because in American society, we idolize generally all things that are European. And so there are cultural norms in the American society and expectations for the appearance of a person that is all European. And so that sets up unrealistic expectations for people who are not of European descent, but particularly African Americans. So because the standard is Eurocentric, generally sometimes African culture, dress, and features are really subjugated. So historically, there's always been a really strong societal pressure for black people to look like the standard. And because of this, historically, just to be able to get a job, black people would have to look like the standard. They would have to change something, in essence, to be acceptable. And so one of the main things to change would be our hair. And we would go to great lengths to relax or straighten the hair. There have been recent studies, and this study I found was just within the last few years, that shows that there's a bias against black women who wear natural hairstyles. In the job place, they are perceived as a less professional, less polished look, and if they're in a job application process, then they are less likely to get the call back for the interview. And so another thing about beauty is that black women spend almost 10 times the amount of money, more money, than other women from other ethnicities do on hair care. We buy more products and then we use more products. And so this black hair care is about a $1 billion industry annually, and that was a conservative estimate. I saw other citations that said it's much more. So one thing I want to say is, okay, how then do black women adhere to this beauty standard? They change their hair. So there are a number of different ways that they do this. They can use this with relaxers, chemical relaxers, and that's kind of what I'll focus my talk on and talk about later. But they also break the disulfide bonds using physical means. So they add heat to their hair using pressing combs, and they also add heat to their hair using flat irons. These leave-in conditioners, moisturizers, and gels, those are other hair products that sometimes the harmful chemicals can be placed in also. So I'm going to focus mostly my talk on relaxers, the rest of my talk, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background so that you can understand why black women do this and understand the reasons why. So if you're trying to go from natural hair to relaxed hair, it is a long process. You have to take your hair through this chemical treatment. Whether it's done in a salon or at home, it's a long process. And usually, once you have gone from a natural hair to relaxed or straightened hair, then as your hair continues to grow, the hair coming out of the hair follicles is going to be genetically curly. It'll have those disulfide bonds in it. So it's like the roots of your hair will be kind of curly, but the part that has been relaxed will be straight. So every 6 to 8 weeks, you go back to the hair salon or go and get the relaxer from the store and then relax your hair again or give yourself a touch-up. So now I'm going to focus on the chemicals actually that are in these relaxers, because about 75% of black women, when they straighten their hair, they use chemical relaxers. And when the chemical relaxation is done, it is a permanent thing. So let's look at some of the chemicals in these chemical relaxers, and then I'm going to talk about some of the negative health effects that they give. So one of the main types of relaxers are called lye relaxers. And so lye, you've probably heard, is sodium hydroxide. It's been used to make soap, but also it is a main ingredient in oven cleaners. It's a main ingredient in the drain cleaners. And also it's used in depilatory creams. Depilatory creams, if you're uncertain of those are hair removals. So those are creams that you put them on your body for some amount of time, and then you rinse away the hair. So sodium hydroxide is used in all of these things, and it's also used in hair relaxers. And these hair relaxers are only marketed to black women. So these are some of the things that sodium hydroxide does. Of course, it breaks the disulfide bonds, because that's the reason that it's used. It breaks the bonds, and once those bonds are broken, they can never be reformed. When it breaks those bonds, then that curly hair shaft is not as strong as it used to be. So you lose the hair strength. Depending upon how long this sodium hydroxide is left on your hair, because it has to be left on for a certain amount of time, usually just a few minutes, maybe 15 to 30 minutes, depending upon how curly your hair is. But sometimes when if the salon technician makes a mistake, or if the person at home who is doing her hair makes a mistake, leaves it on for too long, you'll get chemical burns on the scalp because sodium hydroxide is highly corrosive to the skin. So you can get either 1, 2, or 3rd degree burns. It causes inflammation of the scalp. You get burns when there's contact. So normally people try to put the sodium hydroxide on, but they won't put it on their scalp. But of course, accidents and mistakes always happen. It causes dry patches of skin, and then over time, well, sometimes not even over time, you could put the sodium hydroxide on your hair, not necessarily forget about it, go about and do something, or if you could have some sort of contraindication of sodium hydroxide and maybe some medication that you're taking that could cause, as soon as you put the sodium hydroxide on, your hair follicles, your hair shaft just is broken. So you could just lose your hair. So the sodium hydroxide is really damaging to the hair, and it's damaging to the hair shaft. Over time, then the hair follicle actually is killed off. And by over time, I mean decades, because I know some black women who have relaxed their hair all their life. And over time, then it just kills the hair follicles. So some women in their 50s, 60s, then their hair is thinning, and those hair follicles aren't going to come back because the sodium hydroxide has killed them.
Dr. Poe, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Yes.
I do have some members signing up for questions. So if you would spend
Okay.
about 5 more minutes on your presentation, and then we could do a few minutes of Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you.
So sodium hydroxide is linked to breast cancer amongst heavy users. And heavy means like 4 to 10 times a year. Okay, so that was the lye relaxers contain sodium hydroxide. No lye relaxers don't contain sodium hydroxide, and they are touted as being safer. They're not really safer. They cause the same things, but they're not really linked to certain types of cancers. So the lye relaxers are linked more to cancers. The no lye relaxers are not really linked to cancers, but they still cause the same amounts of damage. One of the other chemicals that is harmful is formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is an irritant for the respiratory system. It causes headaches. It is banned in European. It is banned in Brazil at these levels, but for some reason, it is still found in the United States in some products up to 15%. It causes severe kidney injury. So then some other chemicals that are in other hair products, and by other hair products, I mean shampoos and conditioners. So parabens are preservatives, and they're preservatives in anything that has a high water content. So they are placed in shampoos and conditioners to prevent bacteria growth and mold growth in those products. But they're easily absorbed in the skin. They're harmful to the scalp. They are hormone disruptors, which means that they interact and they keep your hormones from doing the things that they do by they either keep the hormones from doing things that they're supposed to do, or they make them do the things that they're supposed to do more than they should. So they disrupt your hormones and just cause for fertility issues and reproductive issues. And low chronic exposure causes breast cancer in mice. The other class of compounds that is really harmful are phthalates. Now, they are used ubiquitously across products from the United States. They are added to plasticizers, or they're added to plastics to make them more flexible and less brittle, and they're used as just regular solvents in personal care products. But they're associated with weight gain and obesity. They're linked to type 2 diabetes in women, and they also disrupt the hormones and just cause reproductive issues. The last type of product that I'm going to talk about are polyethylene glycols. You'll see them on the list of ingredients as PEGs. They are used to make oil and water mixed, because a lot of products will have oil-based chemicals in them, and some, of course, are going to have water. So PEGs are placed in these compounds to make oil and to make sure that they mix together. They make your hair look smooth and shiny, but that's only for the short term. They are used to give you that really thick shampoo that people like, because you don't want to just have shampoo. You don't want to pour your shampoo out and it be all watery. So PEGs are placed in there to make it thick, because that's what consumers like. But it removes the hair oil, and it just makes your hair and your scalp dry. Causes irritation, hair loss and thinning over time. It actually fades the color of your hair. Not many of them some of them are linked with cancers, but the bad thing is that the FDA or there hasn't been research on a lot of the PEGs, because as I said earlier, this is a class of chemicals. So some other hair products that I don't have time to mention that there are harmful chemicals in are hair dye, and then a lot of the synthetic hairs and wigs and things that Black women use to mask the hair thinning and the hair loss. There are even carcinogenic chemicals in some of these things. So this is what we want, for all these wonderful, beautiful hair, long, silky, shiny, but this is kind of what we get. We get hair breakage, split ends, hair loss, chemical burns, health and fertility issues. So here is my summary. About 50% of the products that are advertised to Black women contain harmful chemicals, compared to about 7% of products that are advertised to other ethnicities, or particularly white women. The one bad thing about, because we're frequent users, we use lots of different beauty care products. And frequent users of the relaxers are more than twice as likely to develop some sort of uterine cancer. The lye relaxers are linked to breast cancer, and exposure to these relaxers starts really early. Because I remember you're a child, you're 6 years old, and your mom's like, "Oh, I can't do anything with your hair. I'm just going to slap a relaxer on it." And it could start as early as 6 years old. The kitty relaxers are no better. They're just advertised as being less damaging, but they are not. Black women are one of the highest consumers of beauty products that have toxic chemicals. We average about 17 or more products. I think that's a conservative estimate, rather, in our bathroom closets, and we could use up to 5 or 6 of them daily. So that means you're having this chronic exposure, and then you're going to have an elevated risk. We spend much more money on hair care products, but then the bad thing is that there are only about 3% of all of the products that are marketed to Black women or marketed to Black people are actually owned by their only Black-owned companies, are less than 3%. So the others of these companies don't understand, don't really know the needs of Black hair, but yet they're selling the products to us. So that is my presentation, and I'm happy to take any sort of questions that you have.
Dr. Poe, thank you. Senator Westerfield, I have you for the first question, followed by Representative Kulkarni.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this. I was texting my wife, and I've already sent her the slide deck, so thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
As the father of a beautiful girl who has 3B hair, and the father of a son who's easily in the 4s, and I'm not sure where his is much tighter and more coiled than our daughter's.
Yes.
I can attest to the fact that the products, I've never seen a bathroom with more stuff. And it's, to my wife's credit, we're trying to find things that don't have so many of these chemicals.
Right.
I was going to ask something that you just spoke to. My question was going to be what you just mentioned there at the end. Is there no initiative amongst the companies that produce this to change or to find a different path here? Because I don't know that the companies can change the societal desire to have Black women look more like white women in their hair.
Right. But they can at least.
But they can stop making products that, my gosh, there was a slide near the top, and I mentioned this. It was slide 11. The lye, the sodium hydroxide, with a 31% mortality rate.
Yeah,
in black women.
Right. Breast cancer, when it's found in black women, is usually found later and for reasons that are different from the hair stuff. It's usually found later, but then when it's found, then there's a 31% mortality.
But between that, the uterine cancer, the other infertility issues that were on a couple of the slides, I mean, I was curious if the industry is making any effort to move away from this.
In the research that I was able to do, it doesn't seem like it, because it's almost as if like they know that black women would do almost anything for their hair. We spend a crazy amount of money, and I feel like I'm a conservative. I have a conservative estimate because my hair is shorter for different reasons, but I think because the money is there, they see this as an industry and the money is there, they know that these women are going to be spending lots of money on it, and I don't think that they are making some changes. I don't think they're making many changes, but in the last 5 years, the natural hair, I don't want to call it a phase, because I don't think it is a phase, but the natural hair, more women are wearing their hair naturally and not processing it with these chemicals. So the industry has tried to quickly change, but it's like you say, they just slap on a label that this is for natural hair, but they haven't really changed the ingredients. Or they'll put lots of alcohols. I mean, alcohol takes off the sebum, makes your hair, leaves people with straight hair not to have that greasy feel. But black hair or really curly hair needs a combination of oil and water, and you just put that on daily. You need a combination of oil and water because the sebum doesn't get all the way down to the whole hair shaft. I neglected to say that on one of the slides, because the sebum, it gets caught up in the curls, so it doesn't make it down to the whole hair shaft. So the black hair or really curly hair won't look as shiny because the oil doesn't get out to the ends of it. So the owner of the curly hair has to put oil and water in their hair kind of on a daily basis. But to go back to your question, I don't see where the industry has started to change a little, but I don't know if they're changing with the ingredients. They could just be slapping a label on and putting fragrance, wonderful fragrance, because lots of people buy
just trying to
things
chase
based
the money.
upon- Yeah, they're just trying to chase the money.
Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Cole-Carney to be followed by Representative Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for this very informative
Thank you.
presentation. I had a question. You have the different categories of chemicals, and you mentioned lye, non-lye, formaldehyde. Are each of these categories equally, like those products, are they equally marketed to black women, or are there certain categories of these chemicals that are marketed to, everybody?
Well, the no lye and the lye relaxers are only going to be marketed to people who have really curly hair, because they straighten the hair.
So those two specifically?
Yes. These are the ones that straighten the hair. And if you already have straight hair, you don't need a straightener.
Right. So the rest of them are just in products, and it's up to us to figure
Yes.
out whether there's parabens in something.
Yes.
Got it. So for those two, the lye and the no lye products, you mentioned there were 3% of companies that were owned by black women or
Right.
black owned that would understand
Yes.
the consequences of some of these chemicals.
Yes.
What do they use in their products?
So actually, they probably use the same thing, but they may have other moisturizers or some other additional things to help the hair after it has been damaged.
So maybe
And
dilution of the...
Yeah, that was the other thing I'm going to say. So it was really difficult to try to find the concentration of the sodium hydroxide in these. Hardly anyone puts that. And I'm a chemist. I think about stuff like that. they don't put the concentrations of these chemicals in the relaxer, so you don't know what the concentrations are. Some could be higher than others, or how do I say? I could just say there could just be higher concentrations. Some brands may have higher concentrations, some brands may have lower concentrations, and that translates into how long you would have to leave the chemical on your hair, and then how straight you want your hair. There's some women maybe want their hair bone straight, like one of the illustrations that I showed. And then, of course, if you want that, then you would have to leave the lye on your hair, or leave we call it creamy crack because it's a white cream. Leave the creamy crack on your hair for long periods of time, depending on how straight you want the hair to get.
Which leads me to my final question.
Okay.
Is the regulatory or liability landscape for the specifically for the companies that are marketing these products to Black women, are those different, or is there? I mean, you won't know necessarily. I'm not expecting you to answer that, but do you know just anecdotally even what the regulation of that is? If there's no concentrations provided and it's only marketed to one segment of our population, that seems to be.
Right. There seems to be no regulation, but just this year there's been a class action suit against, I believe it was L'Oreal, for, you know how you always hear the commercials where the lawyers, I can't think of the public, where they just, I'm sorry, I can't think of the right word. They advertise to the public. So they've been advertising to the public about these class action suits about using hair relaxers, and you have breast cancer or uterine cancer, then call us. So that has occurred. I've seen that and read about it. And that class action suit kind of just started in January. So it almost seems as if that companies are starting to take notice that these chemicals are really harmful, and no one has really thought about the long-term effects of them. And we're seeing the long-term effects in this group of women.
Thank you.
Representative Brown for the final question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Poe.
Yes.
Thank you so very much for this presentation.
Thank you.
And we've had a couple of sessions that we brought forth legislation talking about the Crown Act.
Yes.
And
that's
Senator Westerfield has put forward legislation in the Senate, and I put forward legislation in the House, and Representative Scott was a forerunner with the legislation of the Crown Act.
Yes.
And
it passed in the House, but not in the Senate here, right? Or am I wrong?
All over. We just haven't got it passed. We haven't got concurrence in both chambers and moved that along. But I think that there is a segment of our community that is getting absolutely smarter about hair and taking control of how they deal with their hair. So this presentation, Mr. Chairman, is one I would hope that we would keep this here to be able to share with our colleagues. And Dr. Poe, hopefully you'll be able to come back when we have a conversation about the Crown Act.
I would love to come back.
And lend your expertise to the conversation. But thank you so very much. I'm smarter as a result of your presentation.
Thank you.
And I think it will be helpful for the General Assembly and for people all across the state, all across the Commonwealth, and maybe all across the nation for your work to be put out there, because it scientifically expresses the things that I think people have emotionally come and talk to us about.
Right. Yes.
So, Dr. Poe, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Certainly, you're welcome, Dr. Poe. Thank you again for your work and your continued work at the University of Louisville.
Yes.
I appreciate your research a lot. Members, thank you for an engaging committee meeting, and we are adjourned. We do have an upcoming meeting. Please make sure it's on your calendar for October the 24th for discussion on birthing centers and overdose deaths in Kentucky. Committee